a clay jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod. Seal them together, add the right liquid, and a modern replica can produce a small electrical current. That is why the Baghdad battery became famous. It gives the internet exactly what it wants: ancient electricity in one object. A battery before Volta, a hidden technology from 2,000 years ago, a simple artifact that seems to whisper. Maybe history is missing something huge, but archaeology is not decided by what a replica can do. That is the trap. The real question is not whether copper, iron, and an acidic liquid can make voltage. They can. The real question is whether ancient people built this object to use electricity, and that is where the beautiful theory begins to crack. The so-called Baghdad battery is usually described as a ceramic vessel containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, with bitumen or asphalt used as a seal. It was found in Iraq in the 1930s, often linked to Qujut Rabu near Baghdad, in a region connected with Parthian and Sasanian history. Even that context needs caution. The original excavation and documentation were not clean enough to answer every question we would want to ask today. That matters immediately, because the object became famous not from a perfect archaeological context, but from a powerful interpretation. Wilhelm Koenig, working with the Iraq Museum, suggested in the late 1930s that the object might have been a galvanic cell, in other words, a kind of battery. The idea is not random. Copper and iron can behave as electrodes. An acidic liquid can act as an electrolyte. A simple current can be produced. So the battery hypothesis begins with a real physical possibility. That is why it survived. It is not pure fantasy, but possibility is not the same as proof, and this episode lives inside that gap. The battery idea is emotionally perfect. It is simple enough to understand. It is visual. It sounds experimental, and it gives the ancient world a secret modernity. You can show the jar, show copper, show iron, pour in vinegar or lemon juice. Connect wires, a meter moves, the viewer feels the click. Ancient electricity, but the click is dangerous because it happens inside a modern demonstration. The demonstration adds things the artifact does not provide on its own. It adds the right liquid, it adds wires, it adds external connections, it adds a modern question. It asks, can we make this behave like a battery? That is not the same as asking what ancient people used it for. A modern replica can show capacity. It cannot prove intention. That distinction is everything. The most famous version of the theory says the Baghdad battery was used for electroplating. Gold onto silver, a hidden ancient workshop using electricity to coat objects with precious metal. It sounds elegant. It also sounds like a perfect documentary hook. But the evidence is weak for electroplating. You need more than one jar that can produce a little voltage. You need a usable circuit. You need connections. You need a container or setup for the plating process. You need objects that show signs of being plated electrically rather than by known ancient gilding methods. And you need a pattern of evidence that makes the electrical explanation stronger than ordinary craft techniques. That pattern has not been demonstrated. Scholars and conservators have pointed out that ancient Near Eastern metalworkers had other ways to gild or plate objects. Fire gilding and other surface techniques do not require a battery, so the electroplating theory has a problem. It explains a possibility that the archaeological record does not clearly demand. The theory is exciting, but excitement is not evidence. A battery is not just materials, it is a system. It needs electrodes, it needs an electrolytes. It needs contact, it needs a circuit, it needs some reason for current to move from one place to another. The Baghdad battery story often jumps too quickly from object to technology. Clay jar plus copper plus iron equals battery, but a useful battery also needs practical access to the terminals. It needs a way to connect to something. If multiple cells were required, it needs a way to link them together. That missing hardware matters. Without it, the object can be made to behave like a battery in a modern setup, but the ancient use remains unclear. Think of it this way: a lemon can produce voltage. That does not mean every lemon is a designed electrical device. The fact that a material arrangement can generate a current does not automatically tell us why that arrangement existed. That is the hardest lesson of this artifact. The physics works, the archaeology does not yet follow. Even when replicas produce voltage, the power is small. Small currents can be real and still not very useful. Some experiments connect multiple replica cells in series to increase voltage. that can make a needle move or create a visible demonstration, but now the theory needs more assumptions. Not one jar, several jars, connected properly, filled with the right electrolyte, maintained over time, used for a purpose that leaves almost no clear trace. That does not make it impossible, but every added assumption raises the cost of belief. Good historical explanations should not become heavier than the evidence they explain. The battery hypothesis begins light, copper, iron, acid, voltage. Then it grows heavier, wires, terminals, multiple cells, electroplating setup, missing workshop, missing residues, missing texts. At some point, the elegant answer becomes overloaded. There's another kind of explanation, less viral, less shiny, much less likely to become a thumbnail. The object may have been a container, possibly for scrolls, protective texts, ritual material, or substances connected with blessing, defense, healing, or magic. Similar copper cylinders and sealed containers from nearby contexts have been interpreted in that direction. To a modern viewer, that can feel disappointing. We want electricity, we get a container, but that disappointment says more about us than about the past. Ancient people did not rank technology the way we do. For them, a protective text could be powerful, a sealed object could matter, a ritual container could be meaningful. Healing, protection, curse, blessing, and medicine could overlap in ways that do not map neatly onto modern categories. So the alternative explanation is not boring. It is only boring if we assume electricity is automatically more interesting than belief. The Baghdad battery is not just a mystery about an object. It is a mystery about our desire. Why do we want it to be a battery so badly? Because it flatters a certain story. It says the ancient world was secretly approaching ours. It says modern technology had a hidden ancestor. It says maybe history is full of suppressed breakthroughs waiting to be rediscovered. That is emotionally powerful, but it can also be unfair to the ancient world. It respects ancient people only when they resemble us. If they made electricity, they were impressive. If they made ritual containers, they were less impressive. That is a modern bias. Ancient intelligence does not need to look like modern engineering to deserve respect. Sometimes the past is technological, sometimes it is both. The job of the script is not to choose the coolest answer, it is to choose the answer the evidence can carry. The battery theory is not dead because skeptics dislike it. It is weak because the supporting evidence has gaps. That means the right question is simple. What would make it stronger? First, a clearer archaeological context. If several similar jars were found together in a workshop with materials arranged in a way that showed electrical use, the case would change. Second, connection hardware, wires, clamps, terminals, conductive links, or associated equipment would matter enormously. Third, chemical residues. If the inside of the jar preserved strong evidence of repeated electrolyte use in a way that matched the battery hypothesis, that would help. Fourth, plated objects that cannot be explained better by known ancient gilding methods. The electroplating theory needs objects that demand electricity, not objects that merely allow electricity as an imaginative option. Fifth, texts or images. Even one ancient description of a process involving jars, metals, liquid, and a strange effect could change the discussion. That is why the current conclusion should not be framed as closed-minded. It is open, but not convinced. That is the correct posture for this kind of mystery. There is one more version of the battery theory that is less famous than electroplating. Some have suggested that if the object was a galvanic cell, it might have been used for mild electrotherapy or pain relief. This idea tries to avoid the electroplating problem. It does not require a whole plating workshop. It imagines a smaller bodily use, a weak current applied to pain, perhaps in a medical or ritual context. But this theory still faces the same central issue. The physical possibility is not enough. We would still need evidence of how the current was delivered, why the jar was built this way, whether multiple cells were used, and whether the practice left any trace in texts, tools, or associated finds. It is a clever idea. It may even feel more plausible than ancient electroplating, but it remains speculative. The safest narration is to mention that alternative only as part of the broader battery debate, not as a hidden solution. Again, the pattern repeats. The object can support a possibility. It cannot yet support certainty. So what should we say? The Baghdad battery might be physically capable of acting as a galvanic cell under the right conditions. That part is reasonable. but the claim that it was used as an ancient battery remains unproven. The electroplating version is especially weak because it requires a larger technological system that has not been clearly found. The object's original purpose remains uncertain, and non-electrical explanations may fit the archaeological pattern better than the viral story does. That is not a boring conclusion. It is a cleaner one. Because now the mystery is sharper, we are not asking, can a replica make voltage? We are asking, what did this object mean to the people who made and used it? And that question is harder. It does not fit as neatly into a science demo, but it gets us closer to history. The Baghdad battery teaches one of the most important rules in ancient mystery storytelling. Could is not did. A replica can work. A theory can sound brilliant. A voltmeter can move. A documentary can make the moment feel undeniable. But history needs more than a successful demonstration. It needs context, use pattern residue connections, texts associated tools, or at least enough evidence that one interpretation clearly beats the alternatives. The Baghdad battery does not give us that yet. So the honest answer is not that ancient electricity is impossible. The honest answer is that this object has not proven it, and maybe that is why the story remains useful. It shows how easy it is to turn possibility into certainty. It also shows that the past does not become smaller when a viral theory fails. The real ancient world is still strange, still skilled, still full of objects we do not fully understand. Even when they are not batteries, if you want another object where the tempting explanation collapses under evidence, watch the Roman dodecahedron next. One object might be a battery, the other might be a tool. In both cases, the mystery begins when the easy answer fails.